Hi, everybody. Welcome to Champs Drink Champs. This is Taylor doing a solo episode again. I feel so sad doing solo episodes, but Shelby and I have been so freaking busy, and it's so hard to record together right now. So hopefully when she gets back from Brazil, we'll be more like on a more stable recording together schedule. But for right now, you just get me. So kind of exciting, but also like a little bit sad. So today's episode is going to be all about trauma. I really wanted to talk about this because I think it's very important. And a few months ago, I taught my first workshop at the yoga studio. Sorry, I'm just going to rearrange some things a little because these headphones are being a little crazy and I cannot hear myself. So I feel like I'm screaming. So sorry if that was really loud to start with. Anyways, I taught a workshop a few months ago at the yoga studio about trauma-informed yoga. And it was just the conversations that we had were so wonderful. And I just really think that trauma needs to be talked about more. And yeah, so anyways, it's not going to be about trauma-informed yoga today. It's just going to be about trauma. And I'm very excited to talk about it. This is one of my favorite things to talk about with people and to have people listen to. And I think it's just very, very important. So before we start, though, I do want to do a disclaimer. I am not a therapist. I am trained in trauma-informed yoga. And I do know a lot about trauma from my own research, but I am not a licensed therapist. So I'm more than willing to talk about this subject with you and explore things a little bit, but more than likely, if you do choose, sorry, it is so windy outside right now. Holy cow. Sorry if you can hear that. It's like really loud. If you are wanting to talk about this, I will probably refer you to a therapist because obviously I think therapy is great. So yeah, not a therapist, but I do know a lot. So I'm just going to, trauma is like an iceberg. There is so much to talking about trauma. And so we are barely going to be skimming the surface today, but I think it just gives like a really good introduction and a good background to trauma, and I think it can help a lot of people. So I'm also recording this before I go to yoga, so I have an hour before I have to leave. I just got home from work, so I'm in my scrubs. So that's why I like the weird shirt right now. So anyways, let's dive in because I'm just trying to like kill time because I'm nervous because I'm recording alone. So anyways, okay. So first thing is, what is trauma? So trauma is a lasting emotional response that often results from living through a distressing event. So I really want to emphasize here that every single person in this entire world has trauma. Literally, when you are born and brought out of the birth canal, that is a traumatic experience. So nobody is immune to trauma. Everybody has it. COVID and the entire year of 2020 was trauma for everybody. Whether it was a bigger trauma or a smaller trauma, whatever it was a traumatic event in everybody's life. So nobody is immune from trauma, and no one's trauma is worse than anybody else's trauma. So every single person in this entire world processes their trauma differently, and every single person views something traumatic differently. After a traumatic event, people may feel shock or denial. There may be flashbacks, unpredictable emotions, strained relationships, and physical symptoms that may be present in your life for a short time, or maybe it's a long time. Trauma changes the person, and in some cases, the entire course of our life. So I do think it is important to have a basic understanding about trauma, because every single person that you encounter in your life is going to have trauma, and that will affect them as a person. It will affect their routines, their behaviors, their habits, their communication. It truly affects every single person in different ways. So it is important to just have a basic understanding of trauma, because it will help your relationships with people in your life and relationships with yourself a ton. We never really know what's going on in someone's life behind the scenes. People could seem like the happiest person that has no problems and they could have the most traumatic life. Like, you never know what people are dealing with behind the scenes. So really just trying to be compassionate and loving towards every single person, because trauma is very real and it's very hard and it's very yucky. So when people first hear trauma, they think of something horrific, such as a plane crash, war, natural disaster, sexual abuse, which those are absolutely forms of trauma. But what about when you lose a pet, or growing apart from your best friend, getting divorced, going back to COVID, isolation during COVID? These are all forms of trauma, and psychologists have broken trauma into two different parts. There's little t trauma and big T trauma. So we're going to talk about little t trauma first. Little t trauma is an accumulation of smaller or less profound events, which are absolutely still traumatic, but in the smaller form. So not the grandiose catastrophic things of war, natural disasters, plane crash, something like that. Small t traumas are events that exceed our capacity to cope and cause a disruption in emotional functioning. These distressing events are not inherently life or body integrity threatening, but perhaps better described as ego threatening due to the individual feeling left notable helplessness. Having dyslexia is a really hard thing sometimes. Small t traumas tend to be overlooked by the individual who has experienced the difficulty. This is sometimes due to the tendency to rationalize the experience as common and therefore cognitively shame oneself for any reaction that could be construed as an overreaction or being dramatic. So some examples of these can be a breakup or loss of a job. I have definitely had people tell me that I am dramatic for processing something that is a little t trauma to me. And that is hurtful when people say that. I laugh it off and I'm just like, yeah, whatever. Like, I generally do tend to be a more dramatic person. But when it comes to trauma, there are things that are traumatic to me that I would classify as a big or little t trauma. And one thing that was interesting, when I taught my yoga workshop, I kind of gave like my background of yoga. And in the year of 2021, I was finishing my associate's degree and I was in school full time. I was working full time. I was teaching yoga full time, and I was doing my 300-hour yoga certification, which that in itself is a full-time thing. And it was not trauma to me. It was not traumatic to me. There were things that I did have to miss out on. It was exhausting. I was exhausted all the time. My brain was at its absolute full capacity. And it was something that was very hard, but I would not classify it as traumatic. And I had multiple people in the workshop I was teaching that were like, that would absolutely be a little t trauma for me, where for me, it was nowhere on the trauma scale. It was just something that I felt like I had to do. It was something I signed up for. So I had to finish like what I had signed up for. So it was interesting to hear that something that wasn't traumatic to me can be looked at on the outside as something traumatic for somebody else. So that's just important to bring up, is that people aren't being dramatic when they are processing something that quote unquote is small, like losing their job. That can be a very stressful thing, and that absolutely can be a traumatic thing, especially if you have a family, especially if you're the breadwinner of the family. That is something that is very traumatic. So I think the biggest thing with little t traumas is you're not being dramatic in any sense of any sort of trauma. If it feels like it's trauma to you, it is trauma to you. That doesn't mean that you are dramatic. So with the big T traumas, so these are the big things that alter the way you live your life: a natural disaster, childhood sexual or physical abuse, being in the military, seeing or participating in any sort of combat, etc. Those are things that would be classified by psychologists as big T traumas. So just the bigger things that tend to happen in life. A large T trauma is distinguished as an extraordinary and significant event that leaves the individual feeling powerless and possessing little control in their environment. So if you feel completely helpless, that is a big key factor of large T traumas. Large T traumas are more readily identified by the person experiencing it. So an example of a large T trauma in my life, which some people may see it as a little t, is losing my dog passing away. That severely altered the way that Tony and I lived our lives because she was our child. Anytime we went on vacations, anytime we went to Salt Lake, like it was always we got to figure out what to do with Gypsy. We have to figure this out. Like, she was the first person to greet us when we walk in. Like there were so many things that I still am processing it as a big T trauma. At some point in my life, it will become a little T trauma. And then at some point in my life, it will not even be on my trauma scale at all. So things can change on these scales, just kind of depending on what you do to work through it, through therapy, through time, whatever it may be, but things can change. There are things that probably won't change, like childhood sexual or physical abuse. That is probably always going to be a big T trauma in those people's lives because it literally shapes who you are as a person. That trauma lives with you like something on your back for your entire life. So there are things that don't change and there are things that do change when it comes to trauma. So with all of this being said, how a situation impacts a person is largely dependent on predisposing factors. So any past experiences, beliefs, perceptions, expectations, levels of distress, values, and morals. So my blood clot, for an example, was another big T trauma for me. That will always be a big T trauma for me. It severely altered my life, my thought processes, the way my body even functions. It severely altered all of that. So it will always be a big T trauma for me. And that is something that I'm really having to work through and accept right now, is that this is never going to go away. Like that, like a little person on your back that's always going to be there. There's a meme that goes around online that I've seen multiple times, and people tend to bring it with grief, but I see it as trauma as well. It's like a mason jar and it has a black ball in there. And it just kind of says like, over time, you learn to grow around your grief and the ball stays the same, but your jar gets bigger because you're learning to adapt to that ball being there. And that's how I feel with trauma is over time, you're going to learn how to deal with your traumas and live your life with your traumas, and you'll just learn to adapt. And that's something that I'm learning right now with my big T trauma, my blood clot, is that I'm learning how to adapt with this being a part of my life and something that I have to deal with forever. And it is hard. It's so hard. It's so hard. So, sorry, I'm reading through my notes as I am talking to you guys because this was for my yoga workshop. So there's some things about the yoga teaching in there that I forgot to take out. So that's why I just keep pausing for a second. So I did this little activity when I taught the workshop that I'm not going to do the full activity because it actually took a lot longer than I was expecting. But a good activity you can do for yourself if you want to is think about the year of 2020. I mentioned that we all have trauma with that. Everybody's trauma is differently with that. And you can do just a little meditation with that and you can figure out, that's the easiest example because it's so current. That's the easiest example of trying to figure out where your trauma lies on the scale, if it's a big T trauma or a little T trauma. So you can think about your feeling. And if you want me to guide you through this meditation, let me know if you're curious about like wanting to figure out where your trauma lies on the scale. Let me know because I'll definitely do that. But you just kind of think about COVID, think about your feelings throughout it, think about your feelings when somebody you know got it, wrestling with getting the vaccine, all of those things. And that kind of helps you figure out where your trauma lies on the scale. And it kind of helps you figure out how to determine what your trauma may be. So yeah. Anyway, sorry, I was going to say something else and then I lost it. So anytime, any sort of trauma that I have in my life, this is actually a exercise that I got from my therapist. And then it was kind of reiterated in my yoga teacher training for the yoga therapy. And I do this with any trauma in my life because it helps me process it knowing if it's a big thing or a little thing, knowing if it has severely altered my life or if it's something that is going to be a lot easier to work through. So it just makes it easier for my brain to understand. So I think that that exercise is very helpful. It is a meditative type exercise, which I'm more than happy to lead you through that. Just please send me like a DM on Instagram and I'll definitely record something and have you do it. And then I'll help bring you out of it, because that's another thing, is if you're going to dive into these traumatic places, there are things that you can do to get yourself out of it, which I'll hit on those at the end of this podcast. So I want to talk about what trauma does to your body. So when you are experiencing a traumatic effect, or sometimes even thinking about a traumatic effect, so you've probably heard of the 3 F's: fight, flight, or freeze. This is known as the acute stress response. So this response gets triggered by a terrifying or a traumatic situation. And there are 3 stages of fight or flight or freeze. So there is the alarm stage. So during this stage, the central nervous system is ramped up, preparing your body to flight or flee. The resistance stage. This is the stage in which the body attempts to normalize and recover from the initial elevated flight or flight response. Goodness. And then the exhaustion, wow, you guys, I am so sorry. I should have probably taken a break after work because I've just been going all day. So I really apologize. There's also the exhaustion stage. So if the first 2 stages occur repeatedly over time, so that could be done like through chronic stress, then this can cause the body to feel exhausted and begin to break down. So if you work a very stressful job, we've all probably known someone who's worked a very stressful job who gets sick all the time because they are stressed all the time. It's because their body is constantly in that stress response of fight, flight, or freeze. And if you keep your body on edge like that all the time and never knowing what way you're going to go, and you're just in that stress all the time, your body is going to break down over time. So that's why we talk so much on this podcast about like self-care and taking a break when you need it and doing things to help ground you, because you cannot live in that stress response all the time. Your body cannot handle it. Your body is not meant to handle that. So in response to the acute stress, the body's sympathetic nervous system is activated by the sudden release of hormones. These hormones cause the sympathetic nervous system to stimulate the pituitary gland and the adrenal glands. This triggers the release of adrenaline and cortisol. This chain of reactions results in increased heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing rate. Your body can stay in fight or flight for 20 to 60 minutes after the threat is gone, which is how long it takes for the parasympathetic nervous system to return to those normal hormone levels that happened before the stressful response kicked in. So when I got my hormones tested, I did a spit hormone test, and it was so eye-opening because I get very, very bad anxiety before bed. I am terrified that I am going to die in my sleep, or that somebody I love around me is going to die in their sleep. And I just cannot fathom the thought of waking up and having like a nice peaceful sleep and waking up and like hearing that somebody passed away in their sleep. So when I did this hormone test, my cortisol levels shot through the roof at between 8:30 and 9 o'clock at night. And they were so high, like they were so high. And it makes sense why I couldn't fall asleep at night, because my cortisol and my adrenaline was skyrocketing because I was in this stress response going into bed thinking that somebody was going to die or that I was going to die in my sleep. And so it was really crazy to know, because I would be so confused on why I couldn't sleep at night and why it would take me so long to get into my REM cycle of sleep. And it was truly because I was just activating this response, even though I didn't mean to do it. But now I take supplements that help calm that cortisol and that adrenaline down. And it has helped me tremendously. My sleep is so different. So yeah, it's insane what you can find out if you really focus on the cues that your body is giving you. And I, honest to God, did not know that I was living in a fight or flight response at 8:30 at night. I had no idea. I thought it was just anxiety. I thought it was something that I could control, but I've been doing it for so long, my body didn't know how to stop it. And so it just had become so normal to me. But now that I have these supplements and meditations and breathing, and I do certain things before bed to calm that stress response down, and it has been such a life changer. So if you feel like you are having a high stress response, really, I know I say it all the time, but get your hormones looked at and do a spit hormone test, because I have done blood tests and I've done a spit hormone test, and the spit one gave so much more information throughout the entire day. Both are very important, but the spit one was really to see how I reacted to certain things throughout the day. And anxiety is a huge thing that really, really affects your hormones because it puts you into this stress response. So when I get triggered in my fight or flight response, I get extremely nauseated and I shake really bad. And that's just because of the adrenaline that is coursing through my body. Like my hands will literally be like shaking like a leaf. And so that's my biggest cue now, paying attention to these things now that I know what to pay attention for. If I start to feel really nauseated, it starts with nausea. I get extremely nauseous. And that's kind of like my body telling me like, hey, we're starting to get into this stress response. Like, let's do something to calm this down before it goes to the next level, which is disassociation, and my body starts shaking, mostly my hands. So knowing this is very helpful because you can do things that help this reaction kind of stop it before it gets out of control. This is extremely helpful if you suffer from anxiety and if you suffer from panic attacks, which stem from trauma. So things that you can do to help if you start to notice these things that you are getting into this fight or flight response. Breathing just doesn't need to be anything crazy. Literally closing your eyes. You don't even have to close your eyes if you don't want to, and just focusing on your breath, just noticing where you breathe in through your chest or your belly helps so much. If you are able to exercise, there's been times that I feel like I have so much adrenaline, so much energy coursing through me that I'm like, I need to go on a walk, or I need to go do a Peloton ride, or I need to do something to just like expel this energy that I'm having, or this adrenaline that I'm having. Sleeping can help a lot. Some people prefer to sleep. Talking to somebody that you trust, coming back into your body from disassociation. Disassociation is a very tricky thing because it wants to help you. Your brain wants to help you, and it thinks that if you check out of your body that it will help, but in a lot of ways that makes things worse. And so coming back from your disassociation, and that is something that takes so much practice. The biggest thing that I learned through my therapist, and it helps me so much, is to get a cold drink of water. That coldness going into my mouth, traveling down like through my body into my stomach, brings me right back, because my body will be like, or my brain will be like, whoa, what's that feeling? Where's that cold water coming from? And it will bring me right back into my body. Now that I have practiced this so much, my preferred method is some breath work. But if you are just diving into this, finding something that works for you, the cold water thing is really amazing. Some people just like lightly will like pinch their skin, like their arms. Not hard, we're not doing self-harm here, but just like very gently pinching, just bringing that sensation back in to something on your body. You can rub your feet on the ground. You can pay attention to like where your feet are pressing, or you can like put your hands on something, feel that pressure in your hands. Just little things like that help you come back from disassociation. And being patient with yourself is a big thing, because your brain literally thinks it's helping you by checking out. And unfortunately, when it comes to trauma, you don't want to check out. You want to process things as they come up, because if you don't, it will be harder in the future and you'll have so many things to sift through. It will just take longer. And for me with trauma work, I want to get through it as soon as I can. I want to give myself the love and the care that I need, but I also don't want to delay things. Like I've spent so much of my time in my life delaying working through trauma and acting like it didn't exist that I just like want to be done with it. So we're just going to get done with it. We're going to move through it, and it may feel chaotic for a few months and I may feel crazy for a few months, but I would rather do that than prolong it. So, how to help yourself through trauma. The biggest thing is therapy. We harp about therapy all the time. If you have severe trauma, lots of big T traumas in your life, you're not going to be getting through it without therapy. Even if you go to therapy for a few months and you learn some tricks that really help you, that's great. You've tried it. I think that that's great. Every single person, and I will stand by this, for this is a hill I will die on. Every single person needs therapy at least once in their life, no matter what it is, whether it's trauma, whether it's knowing how to communicate with a partner, whatever it is, everybody needs therapy at some point in their life. I've been doing EMDR therapy. It has been a godsend. Honestly, it has helped me so freaking much. It really has helped me so much. And there are countless times throughout the day that I come back to things that I have learned through EMDR. And I have just barely, I've had 2 EMDR sessions and I am shocked by how much it has helped me already. So I highly, highly recommend going to therapy. If you need help finding a therapist, know that going to your first appointment, sometimes making that first mode of communication, whether it's through text, email, phone call, whatever, is going to be one of the hardest steps that you ever will take in your entire life. There are people here to support you. I am one of them. I think that when people make the decision to go to therapy, it is the bravest decision that you could ever make, because you are truly working through your shit. And there is so much power in that. And I think it's wonderful. And I know how hard it is because I've been going to therapy for almost 10 years now. Wow, 10 years now. And I remember walking into her office the first time, and I truly thought I was going to, I don't even know what I thought I was going to do, but I was extremely stressed. And with the intense therapy that I'm doing right now, sometimes getting in my car to drive to the therapist's office is the hardest thing that I've done in a long time. So I totally get it. If you need help finding a therapist, I have a lot of resources. I can 100% help you with it. So please reach out if you need help finding a therapist, and please just take that first step. Even if it's something that you have thought about but you've never done, just get comfortable with the thought of it. Sometimes that's what you need to do, is just getting comfortable with the fact that you're going to go sit in a room with a complete stranger and pour your deepest, darkest secrets out to. And so just start dipping your toe in with just getting comfortable with the fact that you'll be seeing a therapist, and then take the next step, which is finding a therapist, and then the next step, which is contacting the therapist. So there's no harm in taking things slow as you would like, but therapy is so important. The next thing to help yourself through trauma is journaling your thoughts, feelings, emotions, whatever. This is something that I have actually recently started doing within the last 2 weeks. I just have a note in my phone, and when I feel that fight or flight response kicking in, or I feel like something is stressful, I will type a quick note in my phone about how I am feeling. I started doing this because I'm a big emotional eater, and in the times that I want to reach for food to feel comfort, I'm going to write out what I'm feeling instead, type out. I have not written it out yet because that's a lot of work, and I always have my phone by me so I can just hurry and type something out, and I don't reach for the food. It's so crazy that I spent so many years of my life emotionally eating when there's a really big root problem to it, and getting my feelings out of my body, seeing them out in front of me, whether it's writing or typing, has been so therapeutic for me to really identify what makes me want to reach for food to feel comfort and why I feel comfort in that food. And it's just been very eye-opening. So I highly recommend when you're feeling stressed or if your trauma is coming up, because again, I believe that trauma presents itself to you when you're ready to deal with it. When you're ready to deal with it and that trauma comes up and maybe you're not in a place to deal with it and you need to come back to it, jot down a quick note in your phone. And if you're seeing a therapist, you can also bring that to the therapist. I've shown my therapist my notes in my phone, like, this is what happened this day. This is how I feel. This is how I felt. This is the food I wanted to reach for, or this is what I wanted to do to deal with these feelings, but I didn't do this. And so I also like record my wins. Like, if something stressful happened and I want to reach for food, I want to reach, my go-to is always a chocolate chip cookie. If I want to order a crumble cookie and I don't do it, I sure as shit, I'm going to celebrate that. I sure as shit, I'm going to put that in my note and be like, I wanted this cookie, but I didn't do it. And that's a big deal, because the reason why I got to be overweight is because I emotionally ate. So I'm going to celebrate my wins as well. So journaling is something that I have always had a hard time with, but it is something that I'm really trying to embrace because it really is helpful. Meditation, there are so many different meditations, but the biggest ones that I think help with trauma are 5 senses. And there is like an emotional meditation that you can do where you see your emotion as like a colored smoke coursing throughout your body, and you try and change that emotion with a different colored smoke. Again, I am more than happy to record these and send them to you if you would like to. Just please reach out to me. I don't ever know if like you guys are into the meditations or not, but sorry, I have hiccups. But they really do help. The 5 senses meditation, that's really good for disassociation because it brings you back to your 5 senses. So you go with what you taste, see, smell, hear, and touch. And that is so amazing to help with disassociation. And it's something that you can do yourself once you like hear it. There's also so many of these meditations on YouTube. So if you're interested, please look those up because they help a lot. Another thing is cry. A lot of people don't cry, and crying is such an amazing release that a lot of people need, especially working at the ketamine clinic. My eyes have really been open because I'm a crier. I will cry if I'm happy, sad. I will cry in every Disney movie. Like, that's just who I am as a person. And I was shocked when I started working at the ketamine clinic how many people don't let their emotions out, especially men. We just had a patient that he needed to cry, and he needed it bad, and you could just tell. And we told him, like, we'll turn off cameras, we will leave you alone for as long as you need, you can lock the door if you want, just let yourself cry, just let it happen. And he did, and he came back and he was like, I have never felt better. Like, that was the exact release that I needed. And it's so true. So many people do not allow themselves to feel the emotion that they need to feel. And a lot of times that comes through crying. And Tony always makes fun of me because when I get like really, not makes fun, that's the wrong way to say it. He just always kind of giggles because when I get really like stressed, I can feel like I need a good cry. And so I'll tell him, like, I need a cry tonight. I'm going to watch A Walk to Remember. I'm going to have tissues. I'm going to have, a nice little snack, like whatever I feel like I need to let this emotion out. Like, just so you know, tonight's a crying night. And he's like, I don't understand that. Like, I don't understand how crying helps you, but it really, really does. So please cry. Please cry. Find a movie, find a book, find a thought, something to let those emotions out, because that is a really big thing that your body needs. Your body really needs it. The next thing to help yourself through trauma is breath work and talking to someone you trust. So friends, family, spouse, partner, therapist, coworker, whoever it is. Sometimes you just need somebody to listen, and that's okay. Just make sure that you trust them. Connecting spiritually. So whatever that looks like for you, if that is through church, if that is through yoga, if that's through meditation, if that's through walking through a cemetery, whatever your spiritual practice is, connect to yourself or to your higher power in a spiritual way will help you a lot. Psychedelics and cannabis use. This is something I debated on putting on this list, but it is something that I really, really do believe in. And I want to share an example. Sorry, Mom. I told my mom about this weekend and she looked so disappointed in me, but that's okay. When we just went to Colorado a few weeks ago, we went to a cannabis yoga class and my light's flickering. What was I saying? Oh, we went to a cannabis yoga class and I have used cannabis for meditations a few times. Cannabis is a very, very spiritual medication for me. I don't like to be stoned. I don't use it for fun. It's a very spiritual and personal thing for me. And that is something that I've really discovered about myself is I really connect with this plant medicine. And so when I saw this cannabis yoga class, I was like, that would actually be really cool. I think that that would be like really helpful for the things I'm going through right now. And so we went, and let me tell you, it was the most beautiful thing I have ever done for myself. And I am shocked that I've never used cannabis in yoga before because yoga is already such a spiritual practice for me. And adding this medicine in that I connect so deeply with was so beautiful. I felt this insane love and connection to my body because I've been having some problems with my blood clot leg, and I've just really been in this body dysmorphic, hating my body mode lately. And in this class, I just felt this insane love and safety in my body that I haven't felt in a very, probably ever, to be completely honest. And it was a beautiful thing. It was a beautiful night. Tony and I went and got dinner after, and the food, it felt like my eyes were opened for the first time in a very long time. I felt like I'd been living behind this veil, and that veil was lifted, and food tastes different. I had a lavender martini that tastes literally like Jesus himself made it for me and delivered it to me. And Tony and I had just the funnest conversations, and we were just laughing, and it was just such a beautiful, peaceful night that I have not felt that level of peace in a very long time. And it was something that was really, really beautiful. And tread lightly with this. Do not jump in and do a ayahuasca ceremony. Tread lightly with this and start very slow. And if you are able to figure this, whatever the psychedelic or cannabis looks like for you, do that with somebody that you trust. If you're interested in ketamine, go to a ketamine clinic. Don't buy ketamine off the street and think you can do it at home. If you're interested in cannabis, talk to somebody that you trust, because if you're going to start getting into the psychedelic or the cannabis realm, fentanyl is a really big problem right now, and it is very easy to put fentanyl in cannabis. It's very easy to mix fentanyl in a shroom chocolate. So tread lightly with this. If this is the path that you are wanting to go down, talk to doctors, talk to people you trust. Don't just jump into it and think that psychedelics and cannabis is going to solve all your problems, because it won't. They are very intense things. Ketamine is very intense. Shrooms are very intense. I've not tried shrooms. I've heard that ayahuasca is very intense. Cannabis can be extremely intense. So tread lightly with this, but it is something that I fully 100% believe in. If that is something that you feel like you want to try. Also, don't let anybody talk you into trying any psychedelics or cannabis. I truly believe that it is something that has to call to you. And if you do it before you are ready, I think that that could go down a sticky path. So be careful going into that realm, but I truly believe that it is something that would help a ton. The next thing is laughing. just like people don't cry enough, people don't laugh enough. Like laughing. I once went to this yoga class that was laughing the whole time. Like you literally laid on your mat and you just made yourself laugh. You made yourself think of funny things. And again, it gave me as much release as crying did in just a different way. So there are times that I will turn on Workaholics and Tony and I will watch 10 episodes of Workaholics and just laugh our heads off. And I feel great after. And then there are other times that I need the walk to remember crying nights. So really, I think the whole basis of this is getting to know yourself and getting to know things that help you personally and knowing what you're going through at that moment and what you think could help you in that moment. The last thing that can help yourself through trauma is self-care. We talk about self-care all the time. Sometimes I think that self-care is overused, but especially working through trauma, self-care is so important. I am working through a lot of trauma right now, a lot of childhood trauma, a lot of trauma that I've created for myself through my anxiety, my blood clot trauma. My self-care has been top notch because I literally will do whatever I need to every day to take care of myself. Traveling is a big thing for self-care. So I'm really making time to travel and to plan vacations because I love that excitement of knowing like a vacation is coming up. Yoga is a big thing. Moving my body is a really big thing. Eating healthy foods is a big thing for my self-care. Self-care does not just need to look like getting a pedicure or wearing a face mask. Figure out what self-care is for you. We have countless episodes about self-care that you can figure out what your self-care looks like for you. But that is a very big thing in trauma work. The last thing I'm going to touch on in this is how to be a support for somebody going through a traumatic situation, because this is a big thing, especially in a family unit or a partner, like a marriage, or a relationship, a friendship. If somebody you know is going through trauma or they are working through their past traumas, how can you support them? There's 3 things that I think are the most important. The first one is having zero judgment. Whatever it looks like. I'm going to use Shelby and I as an example. When I was going through everything with my affair, felt like my entire life was imploding. She did not judge me. She told me I was being dumb and it was in a loving way. She didn't just straight up be like, "Oh, you're just being such an idiot. Why are you doing this?" She would tell me like, "I know that you're better than this. I know that you're going through a lot. I know that you are making wrong decisions here, but I am not judging you. I love you no matter what you have done." And that is a huge thing, is she was my safe person through all of this, all of that. She was my safe person because I knew that I could go to her and there would be zero amount of judgment at all. And even to this day, after everything that I did, all the terrible things that I did, she never once has judged me. So being that support person and not offering any sort of judgment, especially if people are on the path of working through their trauma, don't judge the things that they've done. Have a discussion if there is wrong things that were done. Shelby and I definitely had many discussions that the things I was doing was wrong, but having a discussion, having an open, honest discussion and judging are 2 completely different things. So not judging. The second thing is holding space. Holding space is actually something that I want to do an entire episode about because it is a very broad topic and something that I really think needs to be dove into in a smart way, because it is such a big buzzword right now to hold space for people, hold space for this, hold space for that. It's a very broad topic. So this I will definitely be coming back to. I will also want all the listeners' input for that episode through questions. So whenever we record this episode, which I'm hoping it will be soon, within like the next few weeks, I'm going to post like questions and polls and all the things. And I really want everybody to participate in, because this is such a hot topic right now, all over social media, all over podcasts, all over reality TV. Like everybody's talking about holding space. And there is a distinct way to do this and a respectful way to do this. And if people don't talk about it, it's just going to become a giant clusterfuck. So I will come back to that, but basically holding space is offering a safe, non-judgment, loving space for people to come to when they need it. So using ketamine as an example, the building is a safe, secure building. You're watched on cameras the entire time. There is doctors and medical assistants who know what to do if something goes wrong. You're being monitored the whole time. So that is a safe, secure place to hold space for what you go through during a ketamine treatment. So we will dive into this in the future, but that's just a basic understanding of holding space. And then the last one is offer support in whatever ways they need. They need to go to dinner. They need a shoulder to cry on. If they need you to watch 10 episodes of Workaholics for them, whatever it is, offer that support in whatever ways they need. So this is really you need to have a healthy communication line with this person, which if this person is wanting you to be a support as they work through or go through trauma, I think that safe connection has already been established. And so just keeping that line of communication open to know that, hey, if I call you at 2 a.m. in the morning and I'm crying, I just need you to listen. Great, I will do that for you if that's what you need me to do. So that's a basic understanding of trauma. Shelby mentioned in her last episode that we're going to try a different format. We're going to record like the basics of an episode, and then we will do like a second part, quote unquote part, in the future, answering or talking about any questions, suggestions, comments, anything that you guys may have, and dive deeper into the topic. So that's a basic understanding of trauma. I know it's a lot. It's so much. Trauma is so much. And we are literally barely skimming the top of the iceberg with this episode today. So thanks for listening, guys. For Dear Champs Drink Champs question advice segment, I had a really good question that it makes me uncomfortable and my chest is like already getting itchy thinking about it, but it was a very good question and it has to do with trauma. So let me read it. Let me pull it up real fast. I should have already had it pulled up. Okay. So the question was, I would like to know more about your and your dad's journey with ALS. I think it's something that needs to be talked about more. Could you share your feelings and your thoughts about being tested early, and if it's something you and your sisters are regularly tested for? Is it a one-time test? Could you please share info about it because it's truly not talked about enough? I think that this is a great question. I agree. It's definitely not talked about enough. A lot of people do not know what ALS even is, and it is a very touchy subject for me. I will be completely honest. This is very hard for me to talk about anything to do with ALS. And the question specifically said, me and my sisters, we are all on our own journeys with this ALS situation. I will not be talking about my sisters or any of the conversations that me and my sisters have had about it. It will only be about me. It is not my journey to tell other people's traumas, thoughts, feelings, emotions, whatever with my dad and or ALS. So thank you to whoever asked this question because it was anonymous, for thinking about my sisters as well, but I will just talk about me with this. And if my sisters ever choose to share their feelings or their thoughts or findings or knowledge, anything about it, I 100% support that. But it's a very, very hard subject. So May is ALS Awareness Month, and it is I don't even know where to start about this. So ALS is a disease. It is fatal. If you get diagnosed with it, there is absolutely no cure. And there's nothing you can do to even try and find a cure. Like there's not like a chemotherapy for ALS. If you get diagnosed, you don't know when you're going to die. You don't know how much longer you have. You don't know how it's going to affect your body, essentially. Your muscles stop working. And that includes muscles in your throat, in your eyes. So a lot of people who have ALS get to the point that they can't eat, so they have to get a feeding tube. My dad got to the point that he couldn't feed himself, so his wife had to feed him. It does not run in families. It's not supposed to run in families, I guess I should say. It heavily runs in my dad's side of the family. My great grandma had it, my grandpa had it, his two sisters had it, and then I had a cousin who passed away in her early 20s from ALS, and then my dad. And I also have other family members that do carry the gene, so I don't see it stopping at any point. So with all that being said, it's a very real possibility for me or my sisters or my cousins, my close cousins, my uncle's kids to get ALS. And that's what makes it so hard, is because it is such a real fear. It's a very, very real thing for me that I constantly worry about every single day. Every single day, it is a thought that crosses my mind. There's no way to know if you have the gene unless you get a test. It is just a blood test. I do have the opportunity to get the test free of charge because there are doctors that are wanting to study our family, and that is something that I wrestle with all the time, because if you have the gene, it could either mutate and you could have the disease, or you could just live with the gene and it never mutates. So there's a 50-50 chance if you carry the gene, if it mutates or if it doesn't. For me personally, I don't know if I found out if I had the gene, if I could live my life normally, because I feel like any little thing that would happen, I would think, oh, this is ALS starting. There's so many ways I can go about this. I don't even know. There's so much to say about this topic. My dad, when he got diagnosed, he had jumped off. We were in St. George and we were at like a pool, and he jumped off like a rock and he landed at the bottom of the pool like flat-footed. And so he hurt his ankle. And then he had a very severe case a few months later of pancreatitis. And there's people in my family that think this is how ALS kind of gets triggered, how the gene gets triggered, is if you have something traumatic happen to your body, that trauma in your body just doesn't really go away, and that kind of forms the ALS starting. And so my dad's ankle never healed. He always had problems with his ankle. I guess it wasn't a few months that he got pancreatitis. It was a few years. And then he got diagnosed with ALS right after he got out of the hospital with the pancreatitis. Him and I were not speaking at all when he got diagnosed. And that is something that I really have struggled with, because I thought that he was lying about it. Because again, ALS is not supposed to run this rampant in families. So I thought that he wanted attention for having it. And I thought that he, just loved that he was going to have ALS. And so we were not speaking, and we did not speak for probably a year of his diagnosis. And then I saw him, I think it was at a birthday party or something. It was some family thing. And I saw him and his hands were curling in how my grandpa's did. And I was like, oh shit, he's not lying. He does have that. He does have ALS. So, yeah, that's something that I'll kind of dive deeper into. I want to do an episode about grief, because I've learned so much about grief and guilt and all of those things. But yeah, there's really no way to know. There's really no way to know. It takes a lot of testing to know if you have ALS or if you don't. And even then you can be misdiagnosed. I know people who've got misdiagnosed that in my family that they're told that they have ALS and they actually don't have ALS. So I think that the hard thing with it is there's just not a lot of information about it. And the Ice Bucket Challenge that happened a few years ago has actually brought so much awareness to this disease. And that's why I want to talk about it more, is because the more that people talk about it, the more awareness it gets, we're going to get further in finding a cure. As of April, so last month, There has been another medication that has been approved by the FDA to help with symptoms of ALS. So to help like the muscle cramps and the pain and kind of slow down the progression, which is huge because there's only 4 medications on the market that help with ALS. So it's huge, and it would have never happened if people aren't talking about it. So I really do want to talk about it more, even though it makes me extremely uncomfortable. I honestly have no idea what I'm going to do about testing. There are some days that I'm like, I could definitely handle this, and I definitely like am going to get tested. I want to help find a cure, which I do, and that would be the only reason why I would want to get tested. But the problem is I have so many things with my own body that I don't even know if I could get any. I don't know if I could be in any studies or anything because my body is just so not normal that it might just be like a wash if I get tested, and it might just make my anxiety worse because my anxiety is so bad about getting ALS, and it's very hard. It's very hard, and I would never, ever, ever wish upon anybody to watch somebody die of ALS. I never would. I was 6 years old when my great grandma passed away from ALS, and I still remember the way that her hands looked. I remembered how she couldn't walk, how she had to wear like a thing to help hold her neck up. I remember my grandpa being this strong cowboy that had this amazing farm in Oregon, had all these horses, and he just was so active and so strong. And I saw how it completely deteriorated him. And I saw my dad dying slowly every single time I saw him, and his body just literally like not moving. Like he couldn't move. He couldn't take care of himself at all. And it is the hardest thing. It's the hardest thing that I've ever seen people go through. And so it's a very real fear and it's very scary. And I just don't know if I could live with the fact of knowing that I have the gene and if it will mutate or if it won't, because there's no way to tell until you start having symptoms. So yeah, anyways, that is all I'm going to share about that right now because it is honestly making me like really nauseous and uncomfortable. I feel myself going into that stress response. So that's all I'm going to share about that right now, but I definitely am going to share more about it. I am a very science-brained person, and so sharing facts about things, like actual concrete facts, is really where I thrive. Like I love to bring awareness to things. It's when I have to start getting personal that I get kind of stressed about it. So I am definitely going to share more. I did do an ALS walk last year, which was a big deal to me because I literally have acted like ALS just does not exist. And so yeah, it was a big thing. I did not like fundraise last year because I was just getting like comfortable with like finding the strength within myself to even acknowledge that ALS was a thing, and then to be around people who had ALS, and like it just really brought me back to like the trauma with my dad and seeing him with the disease, and my grandpa seeing him with the disease. And so but this year I am going to like fundraise, and I am going to do everything that I personally can to bring awareness to it, because bringing awareness is really helping. It really is helping. Every time I see some new development with it, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Like it's because more people are getting to know about it. So yeah, anyways, that's all I'm going to share about that right now. But thank you so much to whoever asked this question. It's good to be pushed out of my comfort zone, and that was definitely very uncomfortable for me. You could probably hear my voice shaking, and if you're watching me on YouTube, you're probably like, are you going to cry or scream or throw up? Like one of the three, because you look very uncomfortable. So anyways, that is that. So thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Make sure you're following us on Instagram. We're at Champs Drink Champs Podcast, because we're definitely going to dive deeper into this. And yeah, so thank you guys for listening. Please share with a friend if this resonated with you, like, rate, review, and we will talk to you guys next week. I am not sure if it will be solo or with Shelby because I cannot remember for the life of me what day she gets home. So I'll either talk to you next week or we will talk to you next week. But either way, have a wonderful week, you guys. Bye.